When was your biggest I should not be laughing moment? A little girl in my hometown had cancer, and there were massive fundraisers for her for years. The day she died my coworker said, "I want my money back." And I laughed so hard I almost lost my job. My grandpa had been on hospice care for about a month and was in his house. We were having a family party there, and it was apparent that he wasn't going to make it much longer. So with everyone gathered around him, my grandma whispered, "It's okay, you can go to him." He slowly passed away minutes later. My whole family was kind of standing around, processing what just happened when my little cousin, about 5 years old, says we still get to eat cake, right? When I was 10, my 8-year-old cousin thought he'd teach me how to control dogs. So he took a stick and started whipping his 2 Australian cattle dogs with impunity. Soon, the 2 dogs started to attack him, and as he began crying and screaming, I couldn't stop laughing. I crawled up on top of a car and laughed until I cried. His mom called me a monster, but I, to this day, believe it was he who the monster be. My husband and I went to the wedding of one of his coworkers. Before the ceremony a teenage girl got up to sing a song. I don't remember which one, probably Wind Beneath My Wings or something, and it was real bad. Everyone was standing and watching this, and I noticed my husband fidgeting next to me. He's putting his hands in his pockets and then taking them out and crossing them over his chest. I look over and he whispers to me, "I don't know what to do with my hands." It was my breaking point. Everything happening was so awkward and I suddenly couldn't stop laughing. I felt horrible, but I couldn't help it. This is my father's story. He was kneeling in the front row with his brother-in-law at said brother-in-law's father's funeral. My dad noticed that his father had a black eye and quietly asked him about it. He responded he wouldn't get in the damn box. He said they were both crying, trying to hold in the laughter. I was at a wake for a friend's grandmother. Out of nowhere, I hear someone across the hall yell, "Who the hell in the VCR player?" I lost it. I have no idea if someone actually did, or if it was a funeral home worker, or what, but the randomness of it made me laugh uncontrollably for a solid couple of minutes. I was surprised I was the only one. Everyone else was talking softly or crying. I was laughing loudly and uncontrollably. I took a speech class my freshman year of college. The final was a 10-minute presentation about anything you had interest in. There were a lot of foreign students in the class and this Asian girl gave her speech on ice cream. I kid you not, her accent turned ice cream into cream, as cliche as could be, and I had to keep my cool for the whole presentation. Vanilla cream, Neapolitan cream, cream bars. Even the professor was having a hard time not laughing. A couple of years ago my father passed away unexpectedly at the age of 50. He died at home and was not able to be revived from paramedics. Due to formality he had to be taken to the hospital via ambulance and the family was able to say goodbye, spend time with him before the funeral home came. I will never forget growing up my dad used to joke around and say always make sure you put on clean underwear and matching socks before you walk out the door. You never know if you will be hit by a bus and you don't want people to see your dirty jitch. I think it was more a way to give us about putting on clean clothes. Long story short, when I seen him lying on that table in a state of shock, I lifted up the sheet over him and peeked at his feet. I started to laugh hysterically. The rest of the family just stared waiting for some reply. I said he wore clean socks, but I'm not checking his underwear. My sister was the only one who got the joke, and she too started laughing. In my mind, I knew my dad would have got a kick out of it. When I saw Titanic in the theater with my first girlfriend, I burst out laughing at the end. There's this guy who hits the rail and bounces into the water in a very comedic way, complete with sound effects. Or at least that's how I remember it. I admit the Boeing may not have actually been there. When my son was 3, we asked him what he wanted to be for Halloween. "I wanna be a pirate," he said. So we got a tree corner hat and a striped shirt and an eye patch and a vest and got him all dressed up and put him in front of a mirror. He looked at his reflection and frowned. "This isn't what the pirates wear." My wife and I looked at each other. "Yes, sweetie, they do," said my wife. "Not when they're flying the airplanes," he said. "Pilots. Oh." My husband and I got news that his uncle Ted had died. My husband said, "Ted's dead, baby. Ted's dead." I went into convulsions with laughter. I don't know what was more inappropriate, me laughing or him quoting from Pulp Fiction. I'm a big girl. My cousin's baby boy, who was breastfed, kept reaching for my chest during the visitation at my grandmother's funeral. At one point he stared directly at looked at his mother, and grinned. We were all dying. My friend got his phone stolen. What made me laugh the most was that when he lost his phone, he casually said, "Oh, my phone," but then puts his face into his hands. Oh, my case. My scratch-proof case. I nearly died of laughing. At a funeral, the catered food was exceptionally tasty. My dad leans over and says, "Man, he should die more often." Hardest I've ever tried to keep a straight face was at my aunt's funeral. Seasoned I at the coffin doing the whole stare at a dead body thing when she leans over and whispers, I had to leave the funeral home. I've told this before, but here it goes. I was in my freshman year of college when my mother died in the most unexpected and tragic way. When I was at her funeral, this old kind of goofy cousin of hers was sitting behind me in church. He's a big guy, probably in his 60s, and I suspect he might not be operating at full capacity, if you know what I mean. I had met him only once before, so it's not like he is close to my family in any sort of way, but he's just an odd character. So he's sitting right behind me, and the choir starts singing. This dude then thinks it's a great idea to start singing along, and I mean full-blown Pavarotti type high volume singing. No one else was. Now, this was so outrageously hilarious that I couldn't help it. I put my head down and started laughing uncontrollably. My sister next to me started comforting me because she thought I was crying. She puts her arm around me and rubs my arm while whispering it's okay. By this point I was covering my face, hoping no one realized that I was laughing hysterically. The muffled sounds probably seemed like crying due to the context, but I was laughing. At my mother's funeral, that stupid moment actually made that day a little bit better. I broke out laughing after my dad's funeral. He was about to be carried out of the church and I leaned into my mom and said, "You remember the movie Fatso with James Coco? Would it be bad if the casket fell and dad rolled out?" We both laughed as dad liked the movie and found that scene quite funny. The priest looked at us and we explained he had seen the movie and smiled. At my grandmother's funeral, you know how they talk about the stages of mourning? Well, I'd already gone through the crying stage by the time the funeral rolled around. I just didn't feel that emotional at all. When there were speeches being made, I wasn't paying attention and my mind was drifting off elsewhere. I burst out laughing when I remembered a video I'd seen earlier that day. It was one quick burst, and then I tried my best to cover it up, stifling a few chuckles here and there. The person making a speech at the time noticed this, as well as a few people around me. He looks directly at me and into the microphone, says, "How dare you?" It was probably the most embarrassing moment of my life. After the speech is finished I had to leave, just to avoid seeing the old man that called me out. Alright, so a couple years back, me and my family all decide to go see a movie together, and we settle on some new boxing movie with Sylvester Stallone. It didn't look good, but then again I wasn't paying, so I might as well go. The movie was as boring as expected, but when we started getting up to leave the theater darkens again. Some random logo pops up, so we sit down again. Then some slow, almost sad sounding song starts playing, along with a photo reel of two people. Some pictures only have the one. It's a guy and a girl, neither of which are attractive at all, at random places, mostly in our town. Due to the sad music and the 2006 Windows Movie Maker editing quality, my family and I start laughing our collective off at what we figure is either an attempt to get back together or a missing persons ad. Then, the music dies down, and a "Will you marry me?" pops up on screen. Then, the guy gets out of his chair and pulls out a ring about 2 or 3 rows directly below us. To top it all off, when I went to the bathroom after, I bumped into the guy and he gave me the dirtiest glare he could muster. All in all, it was a very awkward experience, set right after the least romantic movie you could think of. 10/10ths would do again. Mentally challenged, boy broke into a rousing remix of Amazing Grace, and moving on up, and my best friend's funeral. We laughed so hard the ambulance was called because my other best friend had an asthma attack. My wife is currently in the last stage of her pregnancy and her emotions have been all over the wall. Sometimes I burst out laughing when she says/does something irrational. This infuriates her even further, which makes me laugh even harder. It's a vicious snowball effect, and I'm unsure as to how she has not killed me yet. I was working on a stroke ward and we hoisted a lady over a bedpan to the ward was silent but her was loud, almost as loud as her groan of relief when she let it all out. I couldn't handle it and had to leave. It was that part of a long day during a long week where you're starting to feel crazy. I was laughing so hard Elle was crying. Luckily for me the patient had severe hemianopia and was registered deaf, so she didn't give a damn I was laughing because she didn't know. Another lucky stroke was that my educator at the time was a chilled out, a relaxed fellow and gave me a telling off instead of failing me. I'm 26 and noises and still make me laugh like a schoolboy.